One of the most important ones is SNAP. SNAP is otherwise known as food stamps, so let's get into it. SNAP provides food assistance to low-income families so they have enough food to eat. Now, when you think about SNAP, you're not talking about a five-course meal. What you're talking about is, on average, about $6 a day. In 2024, there are about 41 million people on SNAP benefits in the United States, which is a lot of people. In Florida, which is where we're located, it was around 3 million. Again, a lot of people. More importantly is how many of these are kids. About 40% of SNAP benefits go directly to kids. All right, now something that you're going to hear a lot about, because we're talking about money that is given by the government to people. So what we're going to hear a lot about is something called the multiplier effect. What the multiplier effect does is it measures how much economic activity increases for every dollar of government spending. So basically, if the government is giving you money, does the economy benefit from that? And what we found with SNAP is that the government benefits a whole bunch from it. So SNAP puts $1.50 to $1.80 back into the economy for every dollar invested. So how does that happen? The way it happens is that those people are using that money really quickly. So they're going to spend the money at their local grocery store. What that means is that the local grocery store will have to hire more workers. Okay, they'll also have to order more inventory, which means that distributors can send out more trucks, and farmers, especially local producers, can sell more of their goods. And each step is going to generate more rounds of economic spending. Now, not only that, but it also means that people are literally going to have enough food in their bellies. And when people have enough food in their bellies, they're more productive. They are less likely to be absent from work. So there's a whole lot of benefits there. So let's talk about the changes that are going to happen to SNAP. There's a law that's going to adjust SNAP. Currently, there's a law that adjusts SNAP benefits to the cost of living every 5 years. They eliminate it. They're also, and this one's one of the big ones, they're going to make states pay 5 to 25% of SNAP costs. This kind of depends on a couple of things, their error rates and things like that. But currently, the federal government pays all of the SNAP direct costs. In 1996, there was a work requirement that began applying to SNAP benefits. And currently, people who are considered to be able-bodied without dependence or disability are required to work 80 hours per month if they're between the ages of 18 and 54. This would raise that maximum age to 64. And the dependence clause there. So dependents right now are children under the age of 18. In this case, to get the work waiver, dependents would be defined as children under 7 years old. So a 6-year-old is dependent, a 7-year-old isn't. Again, this is the House bill that we're talking about here. So an example of how this would impact a real person is if you are a single mother, you live in Waldo, Florida, you get SNAP benefits to support you and your kids. Let's say your kids are 9 and 10 years old. You don't need the work requirements. With this policy change, the mother would be subject to work requirements, which if she can't do it because she can't work 80 hours a week, because maybe she has childcare issues or childcare is too expensive, they could literally lose their ability to get enough food. This would also apply to her 59-year-old mother. This bill is the largest cut to SNAP benefits ever. It cut SNAP by up to $295 billion, which is about 30% of the overall program.
And that's with a B, not an M.
A B. These changes would begin between October of 2026 and October of 2027. Now, we're doing this slideshow on the 25th of June, so there aren't that many pieces of the Senate bill that have been released, but we have gotten some things from it. And so this is what we found. A couple things are a little bit better. So now a dependent actually is a kid who's 9 years old, though a 10-year-old is still not considered to be a dependent. And this one is a very good thing. States no longer would have to pay for the direct SNAP costs. And this is because it's not allowed by the parliamentarian under the Byrd rule. So those two make it a little bit better than the House bill. However, it does force veterans to meet SNAP work requirements. So right now, veterans and a couple other groups have an exemption from those work requirements. These people fought for our country. They can get SNAP benefits if they need them. The House kept those current, and the Senate bill doesn't.
I'm pretty sure that veterans have already put in their time working.
I agree.
And also, 9 years, 11 months, and 29 days, you're considered a child. And at 10, I guess you're paying taxes and working. That's wild. So, not okay.